In the U.S., largely unknown by most Americans, many beautiful national parks and wilderness areas are quietly being turned over to the world bankers, the Rothschilds, Rockefeller cartel, as payment on the national debt. Areas such as the Smoky Mountain National Park, these are then cleared of any citizens and zealously patrolled by the U.S. Forestry Service. This is going on today, and as a matter of fact, of the 98 federal parks in this country, the United Nations has control of 47 of them. There is an agency, a little-known agency in the Treasury Department. It's called the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's a little-known agency whose subversive mission is to monitor every dime you earn, track every dollar you spend, and identify all your assets and property for later confiscation. Let's go on to number 10. Dealing with the use of the slogans, he said, in ancient times we were the first to put the words liberty, equality, and fraternity into the mouths of the masses, words repeated to this day by stupid poll parrots, words which the would-be wise men of the Goyams could make nothing of in their abstractness and did not note the contradiction of their meaning and interrelation. He claimed the words brought under their directions and controlled legions who bore out our banners with enthusiasm. He reasoned that there is no place in nature for equality, liberty, or fraternity. He said, on the ruins of the natural and genealogical aristocracy of the Goyams, we have set up the aristocracy of money. Qualification for this aristocracy is wealth, which is dependent upon us. Well, let's look at wealth. Where's the wealth of this country today? Federal Reserve, right? And where does the money collected from the IRS go? It goes to the Federal Reserve. Doesn't go toward paying the national debt. And from the Federal Reserve System, which is a private held stock corporation, it goes into the World Bank. And the banks are in London, Switzerland, Rome, Paris, and so forth. These are the people that run the world. These are the Illuminati. Very simple. The most recent information on money, and this has been documented, is that there's $1 billion per day in $100 bills that's being shipped out of Kennedy Airport by Delta Airlines to Russia. $1 billion per day in $100 bills, 5 days a week. And for those of you who are not too familiar with the Federal Reserve System, I'm sure some of you do know this. I know most of you probably do. This is a well-educated group, obviously. The Federal Reserve asks the U.S. Treasury to print up $100 bills. The U.S. Treasury charges the Federal Reserve 2.3 cents per bill. And then the Federal Reserve takes that money that they have that came right out of the sky, right from the Treasury Department, and they loan it out. That plus principal and interest. Let's go on now to number 11. He then expounded his theories regarding war. In 1773, he set down a principle which the government of Britain and the United States publicly announced as their joint policy in 1939. Don't you find that interesting? Set down policy. He set down a principle that was announced by our government and the British in 1939. I find that fascinating. He said it should be the policy of those present to foment wars, but to direct the peace conference so that neither of the combatants obtain territorial gains. He said the war should be directed so that the nations engaged on both sides should be placed further in our debt and in the power of our agentures. Yalta again, we gave away. We basically won. What did they do to Patton? You remember what they did to Patton? He wanted to keep right on going. He was told by the president, stop. By the way, are you aware of the fact that we left, our government left, between 35 and 50,000 GIs in Russia after World War II? I'm sure you're aware of the MIA POW issue in the Vietnam. Okay? General Patton wanted to go after them. It was shortly after he said he was going to go into Russia and rescue our boys that he died in an automobile accident. Well, at least he wasn't Arkansas-sided. Okay, next. Number 12. He then dealt with administration. He told those present that they must use their wealth to have candidates chosen for public office who would be servile and obedient to our commands, so they may readily be used as pawns in our game by learned and ingenious men we will appoint to operate behind the scenes of government as official advisors. He added, the men we appoint as advisors will have been bred, reared, and trained from childhood in accordance with our ideas to rule the affairs of the whole world. I find this very interesting. They will have been bred, reared, and trained from childhood in accordance with our ideas to rule the affairs of the whole world. Now, I have, in my experience in developing information about satanic movement in this country, I've talked to a lot of people. An example of this, number 12, being born bred. I was contacted by a lady attorney in New York City. She was a multi-generation Satanist. You remember I told you that's somebody that's been raised, born into the family. Grandfather, grandmother, mother, father, etc. She told me that she was raised by her family. She knew well in advance that she was going to be an attorney, and she was sent to law school, and her specialty was immigration laws. And she would go to Europe and bring children into this country that she didn't know, land at Kennedy Airport in New York City, turn these children over, usually one child at a time, and she was a specialist on immigration, so she knew what to do in Europe in order to get their hands on this child. Bring the child in, turn it over to a man, two men, in Kennedy Airport she'd never met before, and walk away. She was supposedly bringing the child in for adoption. I've seen case after case of history where people were specifically assigned and born and reared and trained for assignments in this area. Have you ever heard of presidential models? Presidential models are sex slaves for some of the top people in the government. There's a woman named Kathy O'Brien who's recently written a book on this. I happen to know of another lady who was a presidential model. And what they do, and these ladies were born for that purpose. In fact, one of them was born on Eisenhower's inauguration. And they're trained, mind control, MK Ultra, Project Monarch, these are CIA mind control programs. They're trained specifically for an assignment. In this particular assignment, she told me, the one girl, the one lady told me that she was molested on a regular basis by her father, and he still loved her, however. And when she was 16, he came in and he was crying in her bedroom. He said, "My dear, I've got to give you up." And he passed her on to some training training with a group of men. She later ended up with some of the top politicians in the country, presidents. I'm talking about presidents. This has been confirmed by two individuals I've talked to, Kathy O'Brien and another one. The other one wishes to remain anonymous. And I understand there are three other ladies who fall in this category. They've all gotten out, and it's just like the children that they use for victims of pedophile. When they get so old, they let them out, push them out onto the street. Okay, item number 13. He dealt with propaganda, explained how their combined wealth could control all outlets of public information while they remained in the shade and clear of blame, regardless of what the repercussions might be due to the publication of libels, slander, or untruths. The speaker said, "Thanks to the press, we've got gold in our hands, notwithstanding the fact that we had to gather it out of the oceans of blood and tears. But it has paid us even though we have sacrificed many of our own people. Each victim on our side is worth 1,000 goyams." Well, don't you find that interesting? We're talking about propaganda, we're talking about the press, outlets of public information. I don't know how many of you are aware, but I recently ran for President of the United States. And in November, late November, I was sitting in my living room. I don't sit very often, I usually am working. But I was watching the politicians, and I said to myself, these people have missed the point. They either are totally ignorant or they don't know what they're talking about. But these people, these men are running for President of the United States. They haven't really addressed the real issues. The real issues are what we're talking about here today. These are the issues. Not, I'm going to go back to Washington, D.C. and make this all a bed of roses. And as far as I'm concerned, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the Democrats or the Republicans. They've both been